Okay, y'all, we're back, and I don't know if you've been watching my videos at all in any kind of chronological order, but the last one that I did was about Samuel Adams, and in it I was mentioning John Hancock just because I think he's very impressive, and I was like, we'll talk about him at some point. I was like, I'll just go ahead and do it because John Hancock, he was very interesting, and we're just going to dive right in. We're going to make this real quick and to the point, and then I will tell you what I was thinking as I was kind of doing my deep dive into John Hancock, because really, of all the people involved in the American Revolution and the founding fathers, people that signed the Declaration, there are very few that are as instantly recognizable as John Hancock. Mostly just because he signed that declaration so damn big, his signature just swept across the page. But as you kind of learn about the man himself, he does actually become larger than just the signature that took up the entire declaration. I shouldn't say the entire, but it's big on there. I'll see if I can find a photo of it, and I'll pop it up if I can, just because it was very much like, who do you, or who doth you think thou art? Because he wasn't playing around, but we'll get to all of that. He was a very wealthy character. He was a wealthy merchant and obviously a very impactful political leader. And he was a very visible figure. Like, he just didn't really mind standing in the spotlight. And those are some of my favorite types of people. So let's just get into his early life, all that jazz. We'll walk through his life together, and then we can chat about him, or what I think about him, which again, I mean, it just doesn't really matter that much, but I always have something in my head when I'm reading about these people that I always want to talk about. So, do with that what you will. And let's just start off. And okay, guess what? Funny thing, John Hancock was actually born on January 23rd, 1737 in Braintree, Massachusetts. Let me just tell you, my birthday is January 23rd. So Aquarius, very cool. I didn't know that about him until I was like, okay, let's make some notes on this fella. But yeah, we have the same birthday. I always tell people it's 1, 2, 3. And if you can't remember that, then you're just selfish and rude, because it's literally 123. But we have the same birthday, except for he was born a couple hundred years prior to me. Now, he was born, like I said, in Braintree, Massachusetts, which is actually known as Quincy now. And his father, Reverend John Hancock Jr., he was actually a respected minister, and his mother, Mary Hawk Hancock, she came from a well-established New England family. And when Hancock was only 7 years old, his father actually ended up passing away, which, 7 years old is terrible, because you're old enough to remember. It's not like you were 2 and you have no memory of it, but still young enough, you've probably felt like you got robbed of time with your father. It's just, I don't know if people back then were in such survival mode, but I just can imagine that would have been really, really tough for the family. Anyway, I'm going to silence my cell phone. After his father's passing, this kind of left John Hancock and his family in a really, really difficult position. Now, fortunately for them, John Hancock had a very wealthy uncle who stepped up to the plate, and without him, God only knows what would have happened. His uncle, Thomas Hancock, was one of the richest merchants in all of Boston, so score for Thomas. And his wife, Lydia, she actually did not have any children of her own, which is back then when that would happen. Obviously, modern medicine, or back then medicine, just couldn't really tell you why. It was just people would be trying to have kids and they couldn't have them. And nobody knew if it was the man or the woman or what was going on. But all that to say, Lydia ended up kind of adopting John as her own, and she loved him, and she was just really, really into having someone that she could nurture and mother, and this impacted and transformed his life in a really, really positive way. So instead of growing up in really modest circumstances with no father to protect or lead or provide, Hancock was raised among the colonial elite. He went from real lower middle class to the top of the food chain in a matter of days, really. His uncle owned many ships. He owned warehouses. He had many trading operations that reached all the way across the Atlantic. I mean, he had quite the enterprise. And young John, he was observing all of this. He was surrounded by commerce. He was surrounded by politics. He was surrounded by these great money making and political minds. And this was influencing him basically from the minute that he got in there. Now, like many very prominent colonial leaders, Hancock did end up attending Boston Latin School before he enrolled at Harvard College. Now, this was not dissimilar to his good buddy or future buddy, Sam Adams. He did graduate in 1754, and basically immediately he began working in his uncle's shipping business. And this was basically just to complete his training and to get him kind of used to being in the real world. His uncle really was setting him up, and this was such a blessing for him. He needed this, and like I said, he was being exposed to not only a good education, but he was being exposed to people who had very sharp minds and were having conversations that he just would not have been privy to if he would have stayed in his prior circumstances. So, Thomas Hancock, his uncle, he actually sent him to London for several years just to learn about international trade. And again, this is something that most people would never have had access to. I mean, he was very, very much in the 1% of the people that he grew up with. He was getting exposure to things that nobody else would. Now, while he was in London, obviously, this is the center of the British Empire, and this particular experience was exposing Hancock to this vast network of commerce connecting Britain to its colonies, but he's kind of on the other side of it because obviously you can get the colonial perspective being in the colonies, and now he actually gets to bebop across the pond, and he's getting to observe from their perspective. So when he returned to Boston, he was fully ready to help run, operate, own a substantial portion of the family business. Now, unfortunately, in 1764, Thomas Hancock, his uncle, his very wealthy uncle, ended up passing away. And along with all of the emotional devastation that comes with losing your uncle who has influenced and impacted your life for the better in all of these ways, this uncle ended up leaving his enormous fortune to his nephew. So, y'all, can you even imagine? This is making John 27 years old, and he overnight becomes one of the wealthiest men in all of the American colonies. And let me just tell you, as somebody who's 28 years old, with the same birthday as him, I don't feel like I would handle that so well. I feel like I'm barely getting it together. I don't have it together. I'm on the fritz of thinking about getting it together. Okay. I just think people had to mature faster back then. So anyway, along with inheriting all of this money, John inherits ships, he inherits cargo, he inherits property and this thriving trade network. He inherits all of these different connections that came through his uncle, business, social, political connections, all that comes with this vast wealth that his uncle just left to him. The Hancock business itself imported all kinds of different goods. It imported tea, it imported textiles, it imported all these luxury items from Europe, and it exported a lot of colonial products like fish and timber and furs and things of that nature that we were good at producing over here. And so he's got stuff going out and coming in and going out and coming in, and he's a busy man. I mean, I'm telling you, I feel like he was probably losing some hair over this. This sounds like a lot to me. And again, I know I'm like kind of a 21st century gal, and so I can't imagine the overnight stress that would come with this. But Hancock quickly became known for his wealth. He became known for wearing very stylish clothing, and he was also, and I think most importantly, very well known for his generosity. Not a generous person in a lackluster or a foolish sense where he was giving away things that would ultimately be outside of his means. He was just a very generous and giving and forgiving young man. He donated a lot of money to different charities. He supported community projects. He was very, very good about helping struggling neighbors and people that he saw that were in great need. And this is something that I admire on a personal level very, very greatly. Very Aquarian of him, I think, maybe. I'm not as educated in that as I should be, but it sounds like something us January 23rd people would do. It sounds like us. But this wealth also brought a lot of attention from British authorities. Now, again, at this time, it's the 1760s. You know what's going on in this country. You know what's happening. Things are getting heated up, Britain began tightening control over colonial trade very, very fast, very frequently. Taxation, obviously, this was the major issue. This was the often spoke about issue. And, really, I guess when it comes to money and the government taking your money, that's when people really start to get worked up. And I understand why, and I get it. You don't want to work for money you don't get to keep. I understand that. So it's always taxation. There were laws, the Stamp Act being the biggest and most abrasive of these laws. This was just throwing people in a tizzy. And later, trade regulations, these were just angering many of the colonial merchants and many of the colonists. And obviously this came to a boiling point, blah, blah, blah. We're going to get to that. But I will tell you that Hancock, his personal ships or his uncle's ships that he now owned, they were constantly being inspected because they were suspected of smuggling goods. Basically, it was just like, maybe the inventory and the numbers were off. They thought he was smuggling goods to avoid taxation. This was a very common practice among colonial merchants. People did this a lot. And again, it's just because people don't want to work super, super hard just to get all of their money taken. And again, at this point, it's like 4% in taxes. So, do you think the John Hancocks of the world would be rolling over in their graves if they knew how much taxes had climbed to? But regardless, survival at this time was so hard in and of itself. Like, it was so difficult to just hack it out there, and people were working their booties off and putting their lives at danger and at risk all the time. And so for someone to come in and say, now you owe us money, 4% of all of your money made, they were like, that's ass, not doing that. No, I understand that. Survival, just staying alive back then with air in your lungs was difficult. Get your hands off my money. I understand. So let me just tell you though, let me get back to the actual story and the outline, because I feel like my brain's trailing a little bit today, and I'm going to try to keep that somewhat under control. This conflict, this colonial British conflict, escalated dramatically in 1768. This is when British customs officials ended up seizing one of Hancock's ships, and this ship was actually called the Liberty, and they were accusing him of this illegal smuggling that, again, a lot of people were doing. This was just so common. Now, this seizure, this business kerfuffle and blunder, outraged the people of Boston. There were a lot of crowds that were formed. There were a lot of protests that were erupting. There were a lot of British officials who suddenly found themselves very, very, very unpopular. People were not liking them. Throw a tomato at the guy, boo him off the street. Because for many colonists, this was just one of many that symbolized British overreach, and it was getting more and more heated. They didn't like it. They wanted the British to basically leave them the hell alone. And again, I understand that. So for Hancock, this particular seizure of his ship, the Liberty, this marked the beginning of his transformation from this very, very wealthy merchant and this businessman who was on a very upward trajectory in the world of business. This is when he starts shifting, morphing, evolving into a revolutionary leader. And this, thank God for this. Okay, so sometimes somebody taking your ship is the best thing that could ever happen to you, because it lights a fire in your soul. And that's what was happening with him. So during this period that follows this ship seizure, Hancock, he ends up forming a close political partnership with our good buddy Samuel Adams. We love Sam Adams. If you haven't watched the Sam Adams video, I'm just going to tell you right here, right now, Samuel Adams is like immediately one of my favorite people. He was a genuine badass, a true thinker. He wasn't officially like master of whispers, but the man knew how to think, and he knew how to shape a narrative. And luckily he was on our side because a brain like his was just necessary. And so Hancock and Sam Adams, they're becoming good pals. They are really thinking things through together. And Adams, he was becoming this master organizer and political strategist. And Hancock, he brought a lot of wealth. He brought a lot of popularity. Again, the people loved him. He was known for being a good, solid, generous, upright man. And people were loving it. And this strong public presence was very crucial to this movement and this new, like, we're in this together thing that was going on between John and Sam. So together, they were helping guide this colonial resistance in Massachusetts. And Hancock, he was actually elected to the Massachusetts legislature, and he became a leading voice that was very much opposing British authority and British policies and all of these things that Britain was just throwing at us. And he was like, this is not going to work. And I'm not afraid to say that. And a lot of people were afraid to say that because, again, you've got people in these lovely red coats prancing up and down the streets all the time. You say the wrong thing, the wrong place to the wrong person, you're going to get your ass in some trouble. But John, he said, I don't really care. This is wrong, and I'm going to say exactly what I'm thinking. And he did, and his popularity ended up growing so quickly. And this is partly because he used his own money to support political causes and public events. And that's not something that was seen very often. That's not something that we see today very often, but he was going to do it. He thought it was important enough, and he was damn right, if you ask me. So in Boston, people admired him not only for this political endeavor and this new political hat he was wearing, but also for his willingness to stand so openly against British authority. He was bold. He had the money to back it up. He had the charisma and the swagger that people took notice. He was just this beautiful recipe for change, and we needed it. I mean, the people, the colonists, they needed it. They needed someone that they admired to look up to, and John Hancock was very much that guy. So by 1774, tensions between Britain and the colonies, they're reaching their breaking point. The water is boiling. It's hot. Everybody's just looking for a leader. They're looking for help, and things are they're about to go haywire. I mean, they're going haywire. I actually feel like this is the point that things were like screeching. And Hancock, he was actually chosen to serve as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. And this is where colonial leaders gathered to coordinate their response to British actions. This is where they're really putting some plans in place, and everybody's getting on the exact same page. And British officials, they very much considered Hancock and Samuel Adams these dangerous agitators. They had a full-on vendetta against them, and they issued orders to arrest both of these men. So in April 1775, British troops, they come marching down the lane. They're in town. They're coming. The British are coming. And, you know, Paul Revere's out doing his thing. We got Sam and John, and they're bebopping around. British armies, they're headed towards Lexington. And this is because they're here to stomp out the rebellion, but they're also here to take John and Sam. They were also on the list. And I said this in the Sam Adams video too, but it was like, we're going to crush this rebellion and grab John and Sam because they have done too much. They've gone too far. They are the faces of this movement. There's no way we're going to actually be able to stomp out any kind of rebellion with these two still walking around. So grab them, throw them in the back. Now, this march obviously turned into the very first shots being fired in the Revolutionary War. This became the battles of Lexington and Concord. This was the opening clashes of the American Revolution. This is where it all came to a head. And Hancock and Adams, they barely got out of there. I'm not kidding you. They barely escaped before the British arrived. And then shortly after the war began, Hancock was elected president of the Continental Congress. So he's still climbing the ranks. He's a very important person in this entire culmination. And even after things were stirred up, things came to a head, he's like, I'm still in this and I'm going to be here. So in this role, he was presiding over debates. He helped manage the revolutionary government. He was signing off on official documents on behalf of the colonies. And thank goodness he was such an upright and good guy, because one of those documents would be the one that became rather legendary. Yes, in fact, that was the document that was signed in July 1776. Congress approves the Declaration of Independence. Now, as president of Congress, Hancock was the very first person to sign the document, and he wrote his name in very large, very elegant letters that swept and stretched very boldly across the page. And according to popular tradition, he said that he wanted King George III to be able to read his name without any glasses on. Now, whether or not he actually said that, who knows? But this particular signature became iconic. He did not hold back. He just threw his name down there in perfect penmanship because he had such a good education. And to this day, obviously, there are a lot of people who still refer to their own signatures as putting your John Hancock on something. We need your John Hancock. You know, I'm sure you've heard this. I don't even know if you've seen that awesome movie, Hancock, but I loved that film. That was just phenomenal. It's just become this well-known statement for a signature, because I do think, I mean, I know it's kind of an interesting thing to be famous for, but it is the most famous signature ever, I think. Don't you? I would think so. I can't think of anybody else who has a famous signature. I don't know. But he did the damn thing. He didn't care. Hopefully he really did want King George III to be able to read it without glasses, because that's kind of funny. Anyway, after leaving the Continental Congress, Hancock actually did return to Massachusetts, where he remained very deeply involved in politics. And in 1780, he was actually elected the very first governor of the newly independent state of Massachusetts under its new constitution. This is very exciting. We had fought so hard, and I always say we, because I do feel I identify as an American. I feel very American, and I get very excited about this kind of stuff. Think about that. We had to go through so many steps towards revolution, and then we had to actually fight for it and fight for our independence, and then we actually had to build structures, and John was there the whole time. He was stirring pots, and then he was involved from the beginning throughout and towards the end. And he ended up serving several terms as governor, and he remained very, very popular among the people of the state. Everybody loved him. He was just a good, solid man. And although he sometimes disagreed with other leaders, Hancock very much supported the formation of the new United States. And he helped greatly in building the government, and he played an important role in Massachusetts, specifically ratifying the United States Constitution. And he was in it from the minute that he really got his ship seized. He got it seized, and he was like, I'm done with this. And he stuck with it his entire life, and he was a very interesting character. And he never let it go up until he did pass away on October 8th, 1793. And this made him only 56 years old. He did not live an excessively long life, but he did pass away in Boston, the city that he loved. And this is also the city that had helped him build his fortune. It had helped lead the revolution. Boston was just this epicenter and this melting pot for revolutionary ideas and thought. And he loved it, thrived in it, helped build it, helped create it. And that's where he did pass away. Now, thousands of people attended his funeral, and this was just yet another testament to the admiration that he had earned during his admittedly short lifetime. I mean, he did not live to be as old as I would have hoped, but he did leave behind a lot more than wealth or even political office. He left behind this symbol, and luckily the symbol was his name. His signature on the Declaration of Independence became one of the most recognizable marks in American history. It represented courage. It represented appropriate defiance, because there's arbitrary and messy defiance, and then there is appropriate defiance, and I think he fell right within that category. And he left behind this good template for someone who was very much willing to risk everything, and he had a lot to lose for a new nation and for a cause that mattered so greatly to him personally and on a macro scale. It mattered so much, and he helped to see that through. But his legacy also lies in the roles he played in bringing together different forces within the revolution. He provided so much financial support to the patriot cause. He gave the movement a very respected and loved public face, and he helped guide Massachusetts through the difficult early years of independence. And there was a lot that went on right after independence, because I think a lot of us think like, oh, we fought this big war and then everything was great, and somehow, you blink and it's the government that we know today, and how did it get so messed up? But there were so many things right there at the start, right after the end of the war, that were just all of these little hiccups, because it was so difficult to take all of these big ideals that they wrote down and debated and they thought through very carefully, but to actually take those and the mixture of so much freedom without letting it become anarchy was really, really, really difficult. And he was still there trying to help nail down where the line was. Obviously, that still gets renegotiated all the time, but he was there through it, and he gave his entire life to it. And in many ways, Hancock represented that bridge between wealth and revolution, between colonial leadership and the birth of the United States. He was a very unique character, and his name remains this lasting reminder of the moment when a group of colonies chose to challenge an empire and sign their futures to a bold new idea called independence. And not only did he put his name down, but he put his name down bigger and more bold than any other person. And then you got other people who are like putting an initial off to the side because he took up the whole page. He was just something else. Now, that is the on paper story, the notes of the life of John Hancock. Now I want to tell you, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's so obvious, but I'm sure that this has to stand out to you too in some ways. The man was so generous and so willing to give for something that mattered, again, to him and to the people around him. I mean, he very much recognized that revolution was necessary, that it was coming, that it needed to happen. And it was not just something that benefited him. And then just to hear that he was so known as a generous character, even prior to any of this happening, he inherited all of this wealth. And he was so young when his uncle and aunt took him in, that he definitely could have turned into a very selfish, like, I don't know if you know any trust fund babies, and I'm not throwing shade or anything like that, but I know a few people with trust funds. They're the most stingy people in the entire world. It's just weird. And he very easily could have become one of those like snooty, wealthy people who was very much only interested in the things that impacted him. He could have become very greedy and money hungry and very selfish. I also will say, when you do have somebody who starts out life, even if it's just for a few years when you're really, really young, but they start off in a position where they're not doing financially well at all, and then they end up doing it, a lot of those people can become very, very nervous and fearful of going back to being poor. And he just never did that. He seemed to have such a good head on his shoulders. The fact that he was known for being so generous with his money, with his time, with his energy, and then to even still pay for things out of his own pocket, because again, it was something that was bigger than him as an individual, and he saw that, and he said, I really, really wholeheartedly don't care what this costs me. This has to happen. I just think that that is amazing, and it's so rare, and you just don't see that a lot with people who come from his background and end up in his position. You don't tend to see generosity on that level. And you certainly don't see people who very unselfishly do things that cost them both time, money, and you're risking, anytime you get involved in politics, you're kind of risking your social respect. You never know if the people that you're speaking to are going to agree with you or not. You just never know. He didn't care. He was willing to gamble a lot of things on something that was right. And I get really jacked up about things that are just bigger, like fundamentally bigger than the individual. I literally can immediately start crying when I think about like the young men who fought in World War II, and especially when you think about like the really young ones who were getting these fake IDs and going and enlisting, and they just knew, this is bigger than my life and I want to serve. I even, like, it sounds so silly, but I get really jacked up about that even when I'm watching in movies. And like, the smaller the person who is more willing to give their life, like you want to watch the last battle in the Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and those little hobbits run in, and I think, oh my gosh, they're for sure, like, they all thought that this was just bigger than them. It makes me cry. I love that. And so in John's case, he obviously didn't do a lot of hand-to-hand combat, but there was something that was just so much bigger than him, and he very much falls into that category of, this is bigger than my life and my own personal fortune. This is something that matters so greatly, and he did not hesitate to get involved. He did not hesitate to put up his own money. And again, these weren't investments. It wasn't like he was like, I'm going to pay for this now and it'll make me money later. This was wholeheartedly like, I'll just pay for that. I got that. And then on an individual level, he was a very giving man. And I admire him so greatly. I know I get really swept up into whomever I'm talking about at the time, as I love me some Sam Adams, and I love Daniel Boone, and I love all the things that I've talked about. I love things that I haven't even talked about that I read. I just get really immersed in whatever it is that I'm learning about. But for some reason, John Hancock, to be sweet and intelligent, that's how I've perceived him, like very generous and a very smart person. I just admire him so greatly. Like, I'm so impressed by his character, and I'm so impressed by his actions and behavior, and I have nothing but positive things to say about the man. So I hope you have enjoyed him as much as I have, and I hope that we can find some more people to talk about that are just as inspiring and impressive as John. So thank you so much for being here. I will see you hopefully very soon. I feel almost stumped. I don't know where to go after this. I just love him so much, and I don't know if we can top it. I know we can, but it's gonna take some digging. I will find some other impressive people. January 23rd is a great day to be born. You should really plan to have your kids on that day. Hopefully they all end up wealthy and nice. Please, God, let me end up wealthy and nice. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you so much for being here. See you soon.